Hi, this is Libertarian Viewpoint, and I'm your host, Sue Jeffers. Libertarianism is all about liberty. Liberty is the exercise of freedom that doesn't impinge on the rights of others. We have all heard the constant drum roll of government solutions. The purpose of this show is to allow you to see for yourself why non-government solutions are a better alternative. Today's guest is Bill Glahn. Hi, Bill. Welcome.
Hello.
Glad to have you.
Thanks.
All right, so what got you interested in free market solutions?
I've always been interested in the free market. Milton Friedman, Free to Choose, one of my favorite books when I was growing up, and the works of Hayek, etc. And being in the energy industry, one of the most heavily regulated industries worldwide, and certainly here in Minnesota and in the United States, it's been interesting to see different experiments that are done with free markets and competition and how they produce different results around the country and around the world. So I think that's something in a heavily regulated industry we could use a lot more of.
So how did you get involved in energy issues in the beginning?
I came from the world of consulting. I began working back in 1995 as an energy consultant and was involved in that until I started working for the state of Minnesota, working for Governor Pawlenty as his energy director.
And what were some of your responsibilities as energy director?
Well,
what does an energy director do?
Pretty much responsibility for everything. How much authority wasn't always so clear, but we interacted with the Public Utilities Commission, which was a separate agency of government that regulates electric and natural gas utilities, energy facilities permitting, putting in transmission lines, as well as large energy plants, pipelines, stuff like that, but also planning, trying to make sure we have enough energy at affordable prices and with reliable service to serve the needs of our entire economy. So
do we?
We do at the moment, but looking forward, that's going to be a concern. We have a growing economy and we have an aging infrastructure like we do in a lot of other aspects of our economy. We have a fleet of power plants that were built back in the 1970s and 80s that are coming near the end of their useful life. So we're going to need to make a lot of important decisions in the next 10 years that are going to impact our energy and our economy for the next 30, 40 years to come.
So while you were involved in the government side of energy, did you find you felt they were more heavily regulated, less heavily regulated? What direction do you think we should be looking for solutions to some of the problems you just described?
We're always going to have regulation. It's
right.
Traditionally been one of the most heavily regulated industries, energy. But it would be interesting to see if we could try some experiments, try some pilot projects with competition and bringing markets into the equation to see if we can produce better results. We have decades of experience of how regulation and a top-down approach works. Can we try to bring competition and markets into a space that hasn't seen that and produce better results for the economy, for consumers, and for the environment?
That's crazy talk. That I hear frequently out there that the reason some of the problems that have happened in our economy are because we didn't have enough regulation. Can you give us an example of why you think competition might be the solution?
Well, one example I like to use, which I think is something that's very telling, is what's happened in the last 30 years of the telecommunications industry. When I was growing up, we had one telephone company. The government monopoly produced AT&T. And you could not own your own telephone. There wasn't much innovation in the industry. It was heavily regulated. There were service quality issues. And they decided to break up that monopoly and introduce competition into that industry. And it's amazing what's happened in the last 30 years. Who could have predicted the cell phone revolution or the smartphone revolution and all the wonderful things that you can do with the phone that you own and can carry around wherever you go? None of that was conceivable back in 1980. But still, AT&T is still around. They're still in business. They're still profitable. But we have all these new innovations that have come up because we introduce competition and markets into an industry. And I think we could accomplish many of those same goals producing innovation, by introducing competition and market forces into the electric utility industry, for example.
Do you have some suggestion of competitive ideas that could be introduced?
Well, there has been, in the last 20 years, a lot of experimentation, not in Minnesota, but in other states in electric competition. Everybody heard about the debacle that happened in California when they introduced some retail competition.
Tell us.
Well, there was rolling blackouts, very high prices, and we probably could spend the entire show discussing what went wrong in California, but other states experimented at the same time and have produced much different results. Texas is one state that a lot of people point to as an example of competition done right, where they introduce competition at the retail level with electric utilities and have a lot to show for it, including, oddly enough, the nation's largest wind industry, which has happened not in more heavily regulated states, but in a more free market state like Texas. Pennsylvania is another example of a state that introduced competition into their electric utility industry and have seen some, on the whole, positive results. We have not tried that here in Minnesota.
Are you suggesting we should have a whole bunch of windmills in Minnesota?
We already do. We are one of the
Great point.
We are one of the leading states in terms of wind power, and it has been done largely as a result of government fiat, government mandates, telling our state's incumbent monopoly utilities, you will produce so much of your power from renewable energy, namely wind. But it'd be interesting to see what would happen if we were to open up at the margins some competition, which we have tried from time to time, but on a very small scale. It'd be interesting to see if we could introduce more competitive programs and introduce more suppliers into the marketplace, what would happen, not just for consumers and the price they pay, but also for introducing some of these alternative energy technologies, which we have been introducing by mandate, but the Texas example shows can thrive in a free market example as well.
In 2007, Tim Pawlenty signed into law the renewable energy standards, where 25 by 25, where by 2025, Minnesota would have to have 25% of its energy by one form or another of renewable energy. Do you think that bill should be repealed?
Well, it'd be an interesting experiment to see what would happen if we did repeal it. I'm fairly certain the industry wouldn't just dry up and blow away. It would continue to thrive, whether it would be at the same level or the same prices. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if we remove that mandate and allowed competition to take its place. A lot of folks argue that wind power in certain circumstances is competitive with traditional, conventional grid power, as opposed to mandating it that utilities must purchase it. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if we removed the mandate and introduced some competitive elements into that program. But as it happens, we're about halfway there to meeting that goal of 25 and 25. We have about half of the power already in place in Minnesota, renewable energy, to meet that mandate. So we're already pretty far down range. It's hard to know what would happen if we were to repeal it outright.